After the legal scrubbing and the translation of the text, it's more or less ready now. And this is really timely to have an in-depth look on the latest state of the negotiation and perhaps also some elements regarding the future development. We are really happy to have an expert here with us. And we wanted to have two panels for discussion, but before starting with these two panels, I'm happy that we can set the scene with our ambassador from Brazil and with Leopoldo from the Commission so that we see how the state of play is, and then we will have two panels with experts for discussion. And we are really limited in time, so I really invite everybody to stick to the time frame we are giving to them, so that we can have also possibility to ask questions and have some interaction. So, even I would like to speak a lot about Mercosur, the advantages of Mercosur and what the Parliament will do. I will stop here, and I'm really delighted to give Pedro Miguel de Costa y Silva, the ambassador of Brazil here to the European Union, the floor for 5 minutes. Please.
Good afternoon to all the participants, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to join this public hearing. I know other speakers will focus on the importance and benefits of the agreement, so I will talk about context, and I will address the disinformation campaign that surrounds it and Mercosur. In terms of context, I want to invite everyone to consider all the agreements that the EU has in place, the recently updated agreements with Chile and Mexico, and the many negotiations underway with countries such as India and the United States. None of these agreements or negotiations faced or face the same kind of opposition, accusations, and unreasonable demands and expectations that you see in the case of Mercosur. And if you look at all of the EU's trading partners, it is very difficult to argue that they have higher production, social, and environmental standards and commitments than those of the 4 members of Mercosur. I call this context because it shows that the debate about this agreement has not always been a balanced one. Some people want to apply a unique benchmark to Mercosur and ask us to engage in an endless loop of negotiations. Of course, that is not acceptable. We have concluded the deal, and now it is time to decide whether to approve it or not. It is always good to recall that trade between the EU and Mercosur will not start the day the agreement enters into force. We have a long-standing and successful trade relationship with the EU. We are the main providers of agricultural products to the EU. And the explanation for this is simple. We are competitive, we have quality products, and we comply with EU regulations and standards. I will give you just one example that puts things in perspective. This table, which I have shared with this committee, shows that the occurrence of animal diseases is much higher in the EU than in Brazil. It also shows the need to check the veracity of some narratives. In any case, I need to stress that nothing in the agreement changes the right of the EU and its member states to protect human, animal, or plant health. The agreement only increases space for dialogue and cooperation. Another misconception is that Mercosur has no environmental credentials. I will share just a couple of indicators to set the record straight. The first is that the current CO2 per capita emissions of Mercosur stands at 2.31 tons, while the EU's reaches 5.66 tons. The second relates to energy transition. In Brazil, 50% of our energy is clean energy. In Europe, the number stands at 23%. Of course, we face the challenge of fighting deforestation, and President Lula has set the target of eliminating illegal deforestation by 2030. But you cannot simply ignore the baseline. Natural ecosystems represent 65% of Brazil's territory. That corresponds to an area that is 30% larger than the whole of the EU. The agreement that we have negotiated with the EU is as ambitious in terms of sustainable development as any the EU has concluded. We have also negotiated an innovative side letter, which includes additional provisions on environmental and social issues. The agreement will not be harmful to the environment. It will not drive deforestation. It will not affect workers' rights or the rights of indigenous communities. On the contrary, it will provide new rules, instruments, and fora for cooperation. Let me finish with agriculture, which is the most contentious issue. Mercosur made important concessions to the EU in agriculture. Not only tariff reductions and quota access in sensitive products, but also the most ambitious list of GIs of any agreement. And the access we received in products considered sensitive by the European producers is very limited. Moreover, the competition will not be unbalanced and unfair. On the contrary, some of our standards are more stringent than yours. For example, the share of land that our farmers need to set aside for the protection of native vegetation varies from 20% of their properties in the south of Brazil to 80% in the Amazon region. This is far beyond the requirements asked of European farmers. I also want to note that our agriculture is in many cases more advanced and environmentally sound than European agriculture. Brazil, for example, has been practicing carbon farming since the 1970s, and we are ahead of you in the use of biocontrols. Mr. Chairman, I will stop here. I wish the panelists a good debate, and thank you very much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador. And now we hear the European voice, Leopoldo, for the third Deputy General here from the DG Trade today we have in the committee. So wonderful. I like this participation. But now I give the floor on Mercosur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What we will not do to please you. First of all, thank you very much for organizing this panel. The Commission has come in front of this committee and the Parliament in general in other committees several times to present the negotiated outcome that was achieved in December last year. So I will do my best to not repeat many of the things that have been said already, and note that we welcome very much the possibility to listen to the views of a number of stakeholders about this agreement. I would like to make a number of points. First of all, let's be clear. EU trade agreements, and certainly the EU-Mercosur agreement, are not just about economics. In this increasingly confrontational world, the interest of the European Union is to partner with countries so that we can rely on each other and we can work to achieve something meaningful together. Trade agreements, and the Mercosur agreement in particular, are prime ways to build and strengthen communities of shared values. And of course, the bond between the European Union and Mercosur is one of the strongest in the world, based on a shared cultural and historical heritage, but also because today we are two blocks of trading nations that continue to believe that rules-based trade and cooperation are engines of progress and prosperity. The second point that I want to make is that, of course, this agreement is also about economics. It offers us the unique opportunity to better integrate a market of 700 million consumers and to build on the strong position that the European Union already has in Mercosur. The ambassador was recalling that this agreement will not result in some kind of a big bang. We already trade a lot with the Mercosur countries. EU exports in 2024 reached 53 billion. Mercosur's exports to the EU reached 57 billion. We have mentioned several times that already today we import 200,000 tons of beef from the Mercosur countries. But what is important is that, of course, this agreement is expected to boost trade. But much more importantly, this agreement will ensure that the additional trade that takes place, it takes place on agreed rules and provides a basis to cooperate on matters of great importance between us. Because this is what agreements do, this is what trade agreements do. They create a platform for cooperation. Look at the EU-CETA agreement. There was the summit between the EU and Canada yesterday. Since the provisional entry into force of this agreement, we have not stopped to find new areas of cooperation with Canada. And there is no reason why we should not be able to do the same with Mercosur. The third point is that if one zooms in, of course, we have been repeating this. This agreement is balanced. It will benefit all the sectors of economic activity in the EU, the industrial activity, but also the agri-food activity. And talking about busting myths, like the ambassador was saying, this agreement is not one where agricultural concessions have paid for market access in other sectors. It instead strikes a very cautious balance between the EU offensive and EU defensive interest in agri-food. And I must recall that the European Union is a net exporter in agri-food. We are strong in agri-food. We should not be afraid. This agreement, of course, improves considerably the market access for the European Union because it reduces tariffs very significantly. It protects an unprecedented number of geographical indications, and so on. It is a modern agreement in terms of sustainability because in addition to the various elements that we find in other agreements, for the first time in relation to the Paris Agreement, we have agreed not only that the respect of this agreement is an essential element of the Mercosur agreement, but this extends also to the obligation of the parties or to the possibility of the parties to leave the Paris Agreement, which is not something that we have put in any other agreements. In addition, it is the first agreement that contains a certain number of binding obligations in terms of deforestation, which must be seen in combination with the own decisions and policies in Mercosur, and the ambassador mentioned what Brazil is doing, but also, of course, the body of autonomous legislation that the EU has been developing, in particular the EU deforestation regulation. So I wish to stress that this agreement is not about free trade. It is about having more trade in line with the rules we have, and in some fields, like sanitary requirements, the European Union has the strongest rules in the world. This agreement is about having a forum to discuss how to make our trade more sustainable, more resilient, more diversified, which is, of course, extremely important in the current geopolitical environment. I look very much forward to hearing the views from the other stakeholders. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Leopoldo. Now we have the first panel with the economic stakeholders. I'm happy that Sigrid Vries, Director General of the European Automotive Manufacturers, as ACEA, is here with us, and you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And the European automotive manufacturers are indeed strongly supportive of the EU-Mercosur agreement to open up new markets, to diversify access to critical raw materials, and also to ensure the transition towards electric vehicles and to have a competitive edge over rivals from China and the US. And I'm therefore really very grateful for the opportunity to share our perspective with you today. It's essential that the full picture of all sectors, across sectors, is understood. And this is what I'll try to contribute to today. The next slide shows you who we represent. 16 leading manufacturers of car, van, truck, and bus vehicles. We operate global brands who are industrial champions, and also central to Europe's industrial base, which is more important than ever, I would say, today in the current circumstances. The next slide gives you some basic numbers on the importance of the auto industry, a key driver of economic growth, but also a key driver of exports, which supports the EU economy. And needless to say that the road ahead is getting bumpier with rising costs and tougher competition. So we really need to, and are therefore also strong supporters of more trade and well thought through trade relations with others in the world. If we go to the next slide, another view on the importance of the sector, supporting employment in Europe as a powerhouse of innovation. 2 million people work directly in the sector, and indirectly even over 13 million jobs are supported. And the benefits of the trade agreements that are currently discussed by the European Union really will be felt throughout all the regions in Europe, which we believe is very, very important. The next slide shows you that free trade is really fundamental to the global competitiveness of the EU automotive industry. With over 30% of the EU's total vehicle production exported to third country markets in 2024. And that is almost 1 out of every 3 vehicles produced here. So this really speaks to the importance of trade as a pillar for growth and also competitiveness. So ensuring free and predictable and rules-based trade conditions really helps reinforcing the EU's position as a global leader in automotive manufacturing and innovation. And as the current geopolitical climate is so very much marked by uncertainty and unpredictability, this really undermines our competitiveness, and we're very happy to see the trade agenda now pushed forward with so much vigor and appetite. We are already paying as auto industry millions every day in tariffs into the US because of Mr. Trump's policy. And with the US market becoming considerably less attractive due to the tariffs imposed by Mr. Trump, we need to find new allies and new markets. So the next slide really shows you the untapped potential of Mercosur, because given the low presence of European vehicle manufacturers in Latin America, Mercosur represents an unprecedented opportunity with over 270 million consumers and annual vehicle sales exceeding 3 million. So it's not just a trade opportunity, it's a strategic necessity. We would be eliminating tariffs of up to 35%. And the expectations are that we could almost triple exports into that region by 2040. So that's amazing. And closing this deal now also gives us a first mover advantage over other regions in the world. Next slide also gives you a view on economic security issues, because it's important that we have access to local public contracts, which would be helped by this trade agreement, but also that we reduce over-reliances on other regions in the world. And this deal will be crucial in the current geopolitical context to help securing critical raw materials that are essential for the electric vehicle supply chain. So it underpins the green transformation also very, very much. Europe, in closing, can only reap the benefits if the deal gets ratified. The EU must move swiftly in approving this agreement to ensure an essential competitive advantage for many industrial and also agricultural sectors. And if we want to safeguard Europe's automotive leadership, we need free, predictable, rules-based trade more than ever. We know that our competitors aren't waiting, and neither should we. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sigrid. And now I give the floor to Ignacio Sánchez Recarte, Secretary General of Committee European de Enterprise de Vin.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President. Thank you for organizing this important debate and for inviting us to participate. Next slide, please. So, European Committee of Wine Companies, or Comité Européen des Entreprises Vins, is the organization that represents the interest of wine companies from the European Union. Wine companies, the companies that are represented by CEEV, account for more than 90% of the export value of EU wines. Wine is a traditional product anchored in our rural areas, in areas where there is no much other opportunities, economic opportunities and alternatives. And we are talking about 3 million people living in rural areas. So the sustainability of the sector is fundamental for the sustainability of our rural areas. If we go to the next 2 slides, the idea of this presentation is to present you why we need the Mercosur market. Is the Mercosur EU agreement good for us? And also, finally, which are the doubts about it? So today we are facing in the wine sector several critical problems, climate change, international tensions, but the critical element, the bottleneck of our sector today, which is touching our sustainability, is the structural decline of wine consumption. And if we go to the next slide, we see that this consumption is declining all around the world. So in the last 20 years, we have lost more than 15% of the wine consumption in the European Union. And in the next slide, you will see that even if in the past we have been able to compensate this decline in traditional export markets, this is not anymore the case. Global wine consumption is going down, so we need new markets. If you go to the next slide, you will see where are these opportunities. When we are talking about Mercosur, obviously we are talking about Brazil. Today, Brazil is more or less at the same level of consumption of wine than Japan. But if we go for per capita consumption, we are below Japan. Brazil is below Japan. So there is a huge opportunity over there. It's a promising country which can really take part of the surplus of production or the wine that has problems to reach other markets because of the trade tensions. If we go to the next slide, you will see that also Brazil presents a very good opportunity, because while in traditional exporting markets we are declining our exports, talking about the US, the UK, Switzerland, Canada, Japan, even Japan, Brazil, which is only in the 13th place, is one of the unique markets that are increasing the imports of wine. So it is an opportunity for us. If we go to the next two slides, to assess if this agreement is good, we see that obviously we need to focus on Brazil, because Brazil is the main wine importer in Mercosur area. And if we look at the competition we have there, we see that Chile and Argentina are taking a big part of this market share. So the free trade agreement offers us an opportunity to go on a level playing field. You go to the next one. And what the agreement offers to the wine sector. First thing is tariffs. We are suffering 27% tariffs in Brazil. We complain about the 20% that Trump may impose to us. Imagine 27%. 27% is just a blockage into the entry. We are also having the possibility to eliminate many trade barriers, which are costly. So export certifications, method of analysis, papers, and finally GI protection. We are playing here a geopolitical fight against other parts of the world who doesn't believe in the GIs. And if we go to the next one, this agreement will allow us to secure our main GIs, all the GIs of the European Union. It will not be immediate. There is a phase-off. It's part of the negotiation. We are happy with this outcome. And if we go to the next slide, if there is any downside, the downside is the fake news we have been listening about. And I will tell you about one. Next one, please. Is the one that is floating around the wine sector. You will hear people saying Mercosur wine will flood the EU market. It is not true. Firstly, because the European Union market is open. The tariffs that we have applying to Mercosur countries, 13 cents per liter, so 13 euros per hectoliter for still wine and 32 cents for sparkling wine, are not a barrier. So they are not going to flood our market, and the market of wine in the European Union is already mature. So we support 100% this agreement and this opportunity for the wine sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Dear colleagues, now we have around about 30 minutes for question and position and 14 minutes for answering. First, I will give the floor to the rapporteur, the shadow rapporteur, and on behalf of Gabriel Mato, I give Mr. Zoido the floor for 2 minutes, please.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I think we can say that the Mercosur agreement is closer than ever. It's excellent news for Europe and for Latin America. After 20 years of negotiations, and thanks to the renewed commitment on the part of the Commission and the flexibility shown by some member states, including countries that were traditionally cautious, France or Austria. Now we see real possibilities of closing the agreement by the end of the year. It's a lot more than trade. It's a strategic bet on our strategic and democratic alliance in a global context, a geopolitical context, which has been challenging with different standards to our own. At the same time, it's an agreement that reflects our commitment to trade policy with clear environmental commitments, more transparency, more political involvement. We've heard the concerns, particularly on agriculture, and the final text will include safeguards, follow-up mechanisms and tools to support the most sensitive areas. On behalf of the rapporteur of this report, I can stress that we are facing an historic opportunity. This is not about just getting rid of customs duties. It's about creating links, pushing for sustainable growth and pushing the world towards rules of equity and cooperation. We celebrate this step forwards and we're working together to make it reality. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. And Francisco Assis for the SND.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Também quero salientar a importância deste acordo no plano.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to underscore the importance of this agreement in geopolitical terms and also economic terms. Given the current climate in particular, we need to forge new partnerships with other regions in the world. And from an economic, cultural and geographic point of view, there is no continent as close to ours as the countries making up Mercosur, and that became clear over the negotiations that have taken place over the past few months. So this is significant progress for the EU and at the same time for Mercosur. Now, last week I met with a number of representatives, members of the parliament of countries of the Mercosur, and even though they still have some lingering doubts, they were nonetheless in favour of having this agreement in place because they do understand that this provides opportunities and will allow them to develop further. Now, we've heard from the panelists and they've been clear. These advantages for the wine sector and the other sectors are clear. And that's not an issue. But there are sectors where the situation differs, and I think we need to be aware of this and listen to those who are not as optimistic as we are. They shouldn't fall on deaf ears. And I accept that there are certain areas and sectors where the advantages are clear for all to see, but if you look at certain agricultural markets in a number of countries, there might be problems, more of a social nature than of an environmental nature, and it's up to us to make sure that we can support those people and find a response to their concerns and overcome these problems. But at any rate, this is a great agreement for the EU.
Merci. Depuis 25 ans.
Thank you. For 25 years, the Mercosur agreement has been betraying us. It's massively rejected by our farmers and a great portion of our public opinion, without mentioning part of this European Parliament. In 1997 and 2008, Council was clear the agreement needs to be global, mixed, based on the unanimity of member states and ratified by national parliaments. France has recalled this recently. Any other format would be a betrayal of the initial mandate. Today, we see that the Commission could split the agreement and split off the trade part and base it on qualified majority. That would be dangerous. The Commission has never imposed a trade agreement on member states that are opposed to it. Mr. Ignacio, I would like to ask you clearly, Is it the intention of the Commission? Are you going to push this through against the willingness of the people of Europe, or will you respect the initial mandate and the spirit of the treaty and what remains of confidence between the institutions and the people? We need democracy.
Svenja.
Thank you. Oh, sorry, it's working. Thank you very much for your presentations. I think that was particularly interesting. I think it's good that we have this very open exchange, particularly to get a lot of the myths around this agreement out of the way and to really stay with the facts. And I know there are a lot of concerns, particularly from the agriculture sector, but I think the solution to the worries are not found in shooting down a trade agreement, but addressing them in the EU internal agriculture policy. But that's something maybe for another committee. Mr. Vries, I mean, we're all very much aware that the automotive industry are facing quite some difficulties right now, particularly looking to China. I was wondering if you could elaborate a bit more. How do you see that the Mercosur agreement could support the EU goals of diversification, particularly for the sector? Particularly when I think about provisions regarding market access and standards and regulatory alignment. For Dr. Sanchez, I mean, we all know that the topic of European wine is a very emotional topic in the debates. We hear that the wine sector really is a part of possible retaliation regarding the US tariffs. But maybe you could also enlighten us a bit more in what regard the Mercosur agreement could alleviate a bit the situation as well. I think that would be very interesting in the current situation. And also maybe to Mr. Vries, particularly with the tension regarding cars, also regarding the US, how this could help the sector. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Saskia.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, and thank you to each one of you for your presentations. Obviously, some particular sectors, such as car manufacturing, wine, chemicals, are going to benefit globally from this agreement, but there's a whole a whole host of voices that we don't hear, and we won't hear this afternoon during this hearing, and this is a shame, because it shows that we have different voices, NGOs, civil society, people from farming, unions, we may hear from them later, who will not be heard. And it's this cumulative effect that we need to analyse, and that's our job as members of Parliament. We need to adopt legislation which is balanced and won't have a negative impact on farming or human health, either in Europe or Mercosur countries, on indigenous populations. Mr. Ambassador, it's not fake news. There's a lot of EU-Mercosur lobbying, but what civil society is complaining about is the negative impact for the indigenous populations. We'll be coming back to that. Obviously, in 2025, we need to strengthen partnerships between the EU and other countries, including Latin American and Mercosur countries, but through partnerships that are fair, based on fair trade standards and the realisation of sustainable development objectives that we've all signed up to. Both continents signed up to that. I have a question on the wine sector. I'm wondering about the positive prospects on wine from Chile and Argentina and the competition that that's creating for European wines. Do you not think that importing more Argentinian wines is going to bring pressure to bear on the prices for European producers? And for the car manufacturing, the tripling of exports that you mentioned, there is a safeguard mechanism on the request of the Mercosur countries for car manufacturing products. Can you explain that? And what is the risk that car manufacturing would develop in Latin America with access to the minerals for batteries to the detriment of European car manufacturing? Thank you, Manon. Thank you. Well, for 6 years I've been in this Parliament, and I'm always surprised to see to what extent a number of lobbies manage to push their points through here in this forum. That's particularly the case with the Mercosur agreement, given how opaque the negotiations of this text have been. I would not be surprised that certain lobbies have information that we as members of Parliament did not have, and obviously the population doesn't have. So we have a number of lobbies that are often at our meetings saying to what extent this is a fantastic opportunity, it's a free trade opportunity with Mercosur countries. That's no surprise. I agree with my colleague. I mean, it's not a coincidence that we have this type of representation of interest. We have representatives from car manufacturing, from wine, the sectors that stand to gain, but we have no one representing the small farmers who in Europe and in Mercosur countries are going to lose. And that's quite symptomatic when you look at the list of guests. On the car manufacturing sector, for example, yes, you're going to sell more cars to Mercosur countries, but who knows? Maybe that will benefit Europeans and European population, and not just the shareholders. Who says that it's not the shareholders that are going to benefit more? And more generally speaking, we're very much aware that the type of sector that stand to gain depends on what you keep in the details. And even in farming, it's the big multinationals that stand to gain. To conclude, you are aware of our position on this free trade agreement. We're here to speak on behalf of the people, not the lobbyists. And Mr. Rubinacci, representative of the Commission, you talk about a climate clause as a tool to control violations and impacts on the climate. But obviously I have doubts when I look at the human rights clause in the cooperation agreement between the EU and Israel, which is not even respected. So how can we be sure that the climate clause will be respected?
Other guests invited from the delegation to the Mercosur countries and from Agri. And first I give Evelyn Regner, the chair of the delegation to Mercosur, the floor.
Thank you very much. After more than 20 years of negotiations for a partnership agreement between the European Union and Mercosur, we've arrived at a complex and pivotal moment. Negotiations have produced an agreement with significant implications not only for trade and investment, but equally important for climate action, labor rights, and broader relations within Latin America. The additional instrument agreed in December 24 contains welcome clarifications on sustainability, on safeguards for sensitive sectors, and on our shared commitment to the Paris Agreement. These are important improvements, and I recognize the efforts made by both sides to reach this point. At the same time, I know many remain unconvinced on environmental enforcement, on labor standard, on agricultural impacts. The debate is not only technical, it's deeply political and values-driven. As chair of delegation with Mercosur, I believe we owe it to our partners and to our citizens to engage with honesty, facts, open eyes and ears. My position is to enable dialogue and actively listen to everyone involved in this debate, and I would like therefore to thank the chair of INTA and the standing rapporteurs for their commitments to always be available for the discussions we have in DMER. It's crucial to hear from all sides, especially from the most affected, before drawing a conclusion. I do believe this moment matters. The way we move forward will send a clear message, not just to Mercosur, but to the world. The European Union is standing at crossroads in very difficult geopolitical circumstances. We should therefore not forget about the citizens and therefore we should show our willingness to engage, to improve, and to work together. So you've seen I've talked quite generally, quite neutrally, but I think that's exactly also the job of the DMARE delegation, really to listen to everybody, and will, like Inter is doing, invite some more. So not only those being happy about, also those being critical, simply to hear to everybody that we have as many voices to be heard. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. No, but we gave the Agri Committee 2 slots, but your co-chair is not here, so I guess then you can have 4 minutes.
Thank you very much for inviting the Agri Committee. I will switch into my mother tongue for my speech. Vielen herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak for 4 minutes. I probably won't need 4 minutes. I just wanted to start by sketching the image of agriculture in general. We've got a representative of the wine sector. It's well known that wine and spirits, also dairy, are reacting positively to this agreement. And on the other hand, we have people who have concerns who reject the agreement. These are people in beef, in poultry, in bioethanol. And for that reason, we need to weigh all of this up. And we need to look at the pros and cons. I think it's good that the European Commission has made compensation available for the agricultural sector. There are also questions about future monitoring and controls. What are the Commission's intentions there? How are they going to adapt monitoring? How are they going to tighten up the monitoring to make sure that the details of this agreement are respected? And how will the cumulative effect of all the different trade agreements be evaluated? That's my question. I think some of our directives and regulations that have already been adopted perhaps need to have a new look taken at them. I mean, it's difficult to understand if we conclude a Mercosur agreement that our own people are straitjacketed by very stringent rules. For example, there's no willingness to come up with a zero-risk category on the part of the Commission for EU member states and member states that have no deforestation risk, for example. And then also in farming, I mentioned bioethanol a moment ago. If we see bioethanol resources as a strength rather than fighting against it, then perhaps there would be more openness there as well towards the Mercosur agreement, if we can see it as an opportunity to expand a market rather than contract. So I think these are tasks for the Commission, not just related to the agreement itself, but to take another look at other policy areas and over the coming weeks and months send out messages to the affected sectors and perhaps lead to a rethink in some people's minds. And thank you once again for the invitation.
Further request for the floor for about 1 minute and perhaps 20 seconds more. Céline.
Thank you, President. Chers collègues, je souhaite...
Thank you, Chairman, colleagues. My colleague Norbert Linz talked about the concerns that our farmers have about Mercosur, which could be a fatal blow to the beef sector in particular, but also sugar, maize and poultry. We understand the promise that the implementation would depend only on the good willingness of the Commission. Our farmers are expecting something on black and white with reciprocity of standards on hormones, plant health, traceability, for example, in Brazil, which only starts at the slaughterhouse. What are the written guarantees that can meet those legitimate concerns? Second question, different sources talk about an invasion of the agreement by the College of Commissioners. Can you tell us about the deadlines, the timescale, when the Parliament will be consulted? And you also say that you've responded to different elements. You've explained things several times. There's something you've never answered, though, and that is the question about the potential splitting of the agreement. It would be a democratic blow which would avoid ratification by national parliaments. Please do not evade that question this time.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank all the speakers for their contribution here. And I would like to respond to the ambassador that made a good introduction. So thank you very much for that. And indeed, certain aspects of your agriculture have a smaller environmental footprint than ours. But that is not what we're questioning here. The big question on the table is basically consisting of two things. First of all, our fear for risk to public health. And second, equal playing field for our farmers. Public health, because of the extensive usage of antibiotics, which still is standard practice in Brazil. Brazil is one of the largest users of antibiotic units per animal worldwide. The usage is expected to double by 2030. And this poses a serious threat to public health in the European Union, where we have worked very hard in the agricultural sector to reduce the antibiotic usage by 70% reduction, to reduce the risk of antimicrobial resistance in humans. So we're concerned about public health when we're talking about Mercosur. And secondly, we are concerned about the equal playing field. And the Commission has, until now, not given correct answers to our questions, as Celine correctly pointed out. We have an unequal playing field for our farmers, and this is not a fair deal for them, because they have to comply with stricter standards than their counterparts. So we do understand the importance of this deal, but we cannot do this at the expense of our farmers and the public health of our European citizens. Thank you.
Waldemar.
Szanowni Państwo.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have a question to everyone here. Are you able to respond to?
Well, I'd like to react to one specific point, if I may. What's the logic behind an economic and trade policy on the part of the EU in this current period? On the one hand, we have climate rules that limit our own production, and on the other hand, we're moving production to other parts of the world, or we're importing. Is that a true economic policy? Where will it take us in the long run? And 20 years ago, we opened up trade with China. We exported our factories there, destroyed markets. And what's the upshot? Well, we lose a couple percentage points every year. Our markets are under pressure. Our producers are struggling. And the same will happen with South America and Brazil. First, we'll sell them cars produced in the EU. And then what? We'll have factories there, job losses here. They will have the technology.
In the meantime, we'll kill our agriculture. Thank you.
Darius.
Bardzo dziękuję, panie przewodniczący. Bardzo dziękuję za tą.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for this presentation. I am very happy that automotive producers are already counting their profits, as they can expect making great profits and protecting their jobs. However, I would like to speak for those who were not able to speak here. Millions of farmers. In Poland, we have 1,200,000 farms. Polish farmers, but also farmers from other countries, millions of people are against our trade agreement with Mercosur. They are concerned with the flood of cheap agri-food products from Mercosur countries. An argument against this trade agreement made by our farmers is the difference in terms of norms and standards. The agri-food products exported by Mercosur countries to the European Union will have to comply with strict requirements. However, the agreement does not speak about animal welfare and sustainable agricultural production. Apart from providing food that is safe for the public, European farmers need to comply with climate-related restrictions and restrictions connected to animal welfare. So there are concerns. The Polish delegation of EPP and the government of the Republic of Poland are against the provisions that pertain to agriculture. For us, agriculture is very important. We worked on improving our standards, so we should not lower the standards, allowing products from Mercosur to flood in.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, Chairman. Despite what we've been told, deforestation will be favoured by the Mercosur agreement. That's obvious. Biodiversity will be worsened. That's obvious. Generational renewal in farming will be compromised. Obviously, consumers' health will be less protected. Obviously, sugar, poultry, ethanol will be threatened. Obviously, do you really believe that it's worth sacrificing all of that for 1/1000th of a percentage increase in European GDP?
Bogdan?
Bardzo dziękuję. Króciutko.
Well, thank you very much. I'll be very brief. The government of Poland has confirmed that they are not going to approve the version negotiated in December 2024, as concessions between sectors are being mixed up, which results in the necessity to create a special fund that would compensate losses for some sectors. I, first of all, would like to confirm the very fact that the fund is going to be established and what is going to be its value. First of all, the tariff quotas for beef and poultry are too high. That's the first thing. And secondly, we went too far when it comes to regulations and the quotas for importing tobacco and unprocessed tobacco. I'm agreeing with what Mr. Joński has said. Standards are different, which will result in interruptions in competitiveness of our agri-food market. So I would like to echo to what my colleagues have said. We need to protect EU agriculture and its standards. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And I'm a little bit confused now regarding the agriculture sector. So I know that European farmers imported in the last year 3 million tons of soya from Brazil, without any question regarding the situation there, using cheap soya for building protein for the meat production in Europe. So if this is the case, then I have a problem to understand the critical voices here. Either you have a criteria for all, or just using only one element. Perhaps, Leopoldo, you can give me an answer on that. So there's another Barry, you want to go in?
If I can, and thank the presentations, and they confirm what we all believe, that, you know, if it was down to commercial reality and economics, this deal is a no-brainer. But it's not always about the money, you know. And I see in my own country, for example, we do 1.8 billion trade with the Mercosur countries and 800 million surplus in our favour. And this deal would help and assist different sectors, as you've mentioned, including the dairy sector, would improve jobs, support jobs, revenue, and so forth. But, you know, we can't compromise the production methods we espouse from an agricultural perspective. We committed a third of our budget to ensuring that those standards are adhered to. And I don't believe that the commitments made in relation to Paris, in relation to deforestation, go far enough, or the timelines provided are enough for us to accept those standards. As I said, it's not about the money, this is about the principle. And the principle is we can't compromise our farmers and the production methods that they espouse to aligns with environmental ambition and consumer sentiment, while at the same time compromising that commitment by virtue of importing goods which are not up to the same standards, irrespective of what explanations have been given. And the commitments, as I said, in relation to Paris and deforestation are not timely in the manner which we commit to.
Borislav?
Sorry. Okay. So I will speak in Slovak. Veľmi stručne.
Just very briefly, so that you understand why we have these doubts. I represent a country that has a strong automotive sector, and the problem that we have to face is the major differences when it comes to wages, to salaries that are paid to workers in Slovakia and the top managers in the headquarters of these international corporations. For example, in 2022, one of these companies in Slovakia paid to their workers an average salary of 32,000 euros per year, but the members of the board of this automotive company, they earned 7 million annually. So here comes the question. I understand that this deal would allow us to increase exports when it comes to automotive companies which are also present in Slovakia, but what we're focusing on is how do everyday workers profit from this, and that's where the doubt is. Will the increase in trade really bring about good profit, good benefits for our workers? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So 6 minutes answer from Sigrid and Ignacio. Sigrid.
Thank you, and thank you to all of you for your very interesting questions and thoughtful comments as well. I think what this deal does, or has the potential to do, is really increase the competitiveness of the automobile industry, which is an incredibly important industry for Europe. And by doing so, it secures production and manufacturing in Europe, which we are at the moment losing, and thereby it also secures jobs in Europe. So I think there is a direct interest in entering into these agreements. The industry is globally oriented, serves markets all over the world, calibrates its footprint of manufacturing all over the world, and that sounds a bit sterile, but it's an equation that needs to fit, and competitiveness is very important in that, and therefore also the trade agreements. It also gives a first mover advantage, this agreement, if then concluded, over fierce competitors such as China and the US. And it helps diversify critical supply chains that are important for the innovative vehicles of today and the future, especially electric vehicles, where we need access and where we need to avoid trade disruptions. On that point of regulatory convergence, indeed, because there is an automotive annex, that will also help tackling technical barriers to trade, bringing Mercosur countries closer to international automotive standards, which again helps and supports competitiveness. So, you know, if I needed to conclude, we are here today to present a broader picture of the benefits of an agreement that will positively impact so many industrial and also agricultural sectors in the EU. And for a long time, the attention has been focused on the negative effects of this agreement. But I think it has only become so visible with the current geopolitical tensions and the need to have economic security and to build our resilience as a European economy, that it's really time to consider a way more balanced view of what this deal stands to bring to the table. In times when the notion of competitiveness are really at the heart of all of the discussions we're having today with the European Commission, with national governments, with you in the European Parliament, in a lot of domains, we cannot miss this opportunity that we have at hand to make our European companies more competitive in the global scene. And last thought, perhaps also, as manufacturers are competitive, they also manufacture in other regions. They are already manufacturing also in the Mercosur region, and they would build that out further, then also, again, contributing to local communities over there, bringing innovative vehicles to those regions as well, supporting mobility there, but also here. And mobility, transport is still a critical element of our economies here and across the world. I'm happy to answer more questions, but I'll leave it here for the moment. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Ignacio.
Thank you very much, President. First, to respond, who will benefit from this agreement? In the wine sector, it's clear we do not delocalize. You cannot produce a Rioja, Champagne, Bourgogne outside of the region. So this agreement will bring benefit to Europeans. And within these Europeans, within the wine sector, we are not talking about multinationals. I mean, if you compare, 99% of our companies are micro, small-size companies, medium-size. And even those who are big are playing in a completely different league from other sectors. If we compare ourselves with the automotive industry, of the chemical industry, or other sectors, even in the bioethanol industry, we are small, very small. So the benefits will go to particular people, to a sector which is high labor-intense work. There was some question about geopolitics and how the Mercosur could help us in the current tension with the US. There is no way that Mercosur or any other market in the world can absorb from one day to the other a disruption of the US trade wine market. We are sending 28% of our wines exported go to the US. Only 1% go to Brazil. But even if immediately we are not going to find an alternative market, it is fundamental that we de-escalate our risk to a unique market. China, which is important, is going down. US is under threat. We need to diversify. We need to be able to invest in other countries, because the wine market, it takes years to get to a market. And nobody is investing strongly in Brazil because of these 27% tariffs, because of this. So there is a great opportunity there. Concerning the competition, the European wine market is mature. European wine consumers, they love European wines, and even if they want to taste other wines from all around the world, it is not the lack of an agreement that is impeding Argentinian wines to get to European Union. They are facing 13 cents per liter. This is not a trade barrier. And the European Union, and thanks to the Commission, we are a super fair market. We have rules, and you abide to rules, you get into the market on the full single market. So that's not a blockage, and this agreement will not open the doors to Argentinian wines. Chile, I recall that Chile is outside of the Mercosur. And there is also a geopolitical opportunity. I mentioned the GIs. We are not just trying to protect the Prosecco, the Champagne, and other GIs in Brazil. We are playing a chess game globally against the USA, without mentioning this country. And we need to secure the GI approach in South America. So it's fundamental. In addition to that, we are going to be able to bring what we call a secure net on wine standards. You may know that there are different philosophies. In the European Union, in traditional wine producing markets, we believe that the way we produce wine just should not alter the nature of wine. We are just accompanying the grape and the mast and the wine to evolve to its full potential. There are other parts of the world that may think that wine can be produced as a biscuit. If I consider that this is better for the final product, I can do it. No, we have an international standard, EU standard, and this agreement will allow us to secure against geopolitically in South America this concept Brazil and Argentina are abiding to, are getting it, to a global harmonized standard to secure the concept of wine all around the world. So it's a great opportunity that we cannot miss. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. This was the first panel. Leopoldo is still here, and he took note of all the questions to him, and he will come back after the second panel. In the second panel, we have now academic and civil society. Yeah. He will answer. He take note of them, and so. And he has to take note, and he will answer. Second panel is based on academia and civil society. And the first is Arancha González, the Dean from Paris School of International Affairs of Science Pro in Paris, for 5 minutes. Please, connected remotely.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On the 2nd of April 2025, we saw a unilateral assault on international trade by the administration of one country, not to make global trade fairer, not to reform the international trading system, but to interpret the rules of international trade to the benefit of the US and its own companies, irrespective of the costs on others, including its ally in the EU, imposing a zero-sum game mentality to what is effectively a positive sum game. The US is 13% of international trade. Whatever the 87% remaining will do will matter a lot for the future. And this is what this conversation is about. Is about what part of this 87% of world trade do to build their own resilience against unilateral attacks on their economics and trade. So this agreement is about negotiations, not coercion, is about reciprocal concessions, not about unilateralism, is about safeguards for international trade, safety, security, sustainability, inclusiveness, rather than not respect for values. This is an agreement for win-win rather than for zero-sum mentality. So my first point, Mr. Chairman, is that at the time of incredible geopolitical turbulence, this agreement builds resilience and international cooperation by two important regions of the world. It shows a different way. My second point, when I look at the substance of this agreement, and I am not running for any sector or any country or any specific interest, I'm looking at this as an academic, I see an agreement that is, to me, looks not perfect, but looks solid, looks balanced, and looks fair. So, briefly, solid. There are important gains for both regions. Not everyone got what everyone wanted, but it's solid in the form of customs duty savings on important industrial, agro-food and services trade that matters a lot to economic operators. It has simpler customs procedures for the millions of SMEs on both regions. It creates new opportunities on government procurement. It helps access much-needed raw materials. It helps build resilience of supply chains. It protects valuable geographical indications for EU agro-food exporters. It's balanced because it ensures that sensitive sectors on both sides are specifically protected. For the EU, since we are talking of the EU, beef, poultry, sugar, ethanol, well-calibrated quotas, gradual market opening, and safeguards to help with market disruptions. The Commission has learned from the past. It's my sense, and this is why I see also the idea of setting up aside a fund that would help importers that are negatively affected by this agreement. Finally, it's fair because exporters to the EU must respect EU food and safety standards. My third point, it places sustainability and inclusiveness at the heart of the agreement. At a time when other countries are moving out of the Paris Climate Agreement, both regions are making respect for the Paris Climate Agreement an element of the bilateral deal or bi-regional deal. At a time when others don't care about deforestation, this agreement includes clauses for the first time legally binding on deforestation. At a time when others reject the idea of inclusion, this agreement has provisions on trade and women's economic empowerment. At a time when others don't care about workers, this agreement makes cooperation between the two regions to meet ILO labor standards and support indigenous people. So in a nutshell, Mr. Chairman, my sense is that this is an agreement that Europe and European members of Parliament can and should support, if only to show that they do not want the rules and the way of operating that others are pretending to impose on us. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Arancha, for this assessment. Now we have the view from the European Trade Union. Elena Costa, please.
Thank you. I'm not listed in the program. I should have been the Deputy General Secretary of the ETUC, but it had a little issue. So here I am representing the ETUC, a confederation of trade unions on this side of the agreement. But our position has been jointly elaborated with the trade unions from the 4 Mercosur countries, and we have shared with you this briefing. I'll go straight to the matter. We are not against trade agreements in general. We are not against an agreement with Mercosur. We understand the importance of diversification, especially in the current circumstances. But we are disappointed with certain features or lack thereof in this agreement, and we will continue to call for improvement, and we will continue to object to some of the current terms of this agreement until these are changed. Again, a lot is said about the geopolitical imperative, but we believe fundamentally that we should not be trading away our common standards. By the way, we're not talking about imposing European standards on trade partners. When workers speak about the protection of labor rights, we usually refer to ILO, the International Labour Organization conventions, which are internationally agreed standards. Yes, most conventions have been ratified by our partners, but there is still an issue with implementation. And this is not a one-sided organization. Our trade partners can levy the same objection towards a number of European countries. Is a two-way street, obviously. But workers on both sides of this partnership advocate for the same issue. And in response to the comments made initially by the ambassador, I want to say that we have elaborated 4 objective tests that we measure trade agreements against. And we apply these to all trade agreements. We don't make this an exception. So it's not like that we're viewing the Mercosur deal with a different lens than other trade agreements. And when it comes to the protection of labor rights, we have asked for more stringent commitments to partners like the United Kingdom and New Zealand. So again, we have asked for these things, and we will continue to ask for these things. So it's not exceptional to the 4 countries in Mercosur. So the 4 tests are: 1, the democratic legitimacy. Now, this is a little bit besides the point because negotiations have concluded, but we would have definitely have liked to be more involved. And we believe that this issue of the splitting is a circumvention of democratic scrutiny as well. And the mandate, I mean, yes, the negotiations have been rushed towards the end, but still on the basis of a mandate, but that by the end was extremely outdated. It could not have possibly taken account of all the latest developments internationally and in trade trends. The second test, as I mentioned, is our core business, is labor rights. Again, I stress we look at the effective implementation of ILO conventions and the mechanisms and possibilities for workers to address labor violations and to hold the parties accountable. Which brings me to the third test, one of enforceability. Naturally, there must be an understanding that if the Paris Agreement is an essential element of the agreement and there are mechanisms for its enforceability, why is that not done the same on the labor clauses of the agreement? And again, we are slightly disappointed. We understand also that there are maybe additional measures being looked at, but they do not contemplate workers' rights. And the fourth test is about the diversification of supply chains. We're all for that, but supply chains also must strive for sustainability and for raising standards throughout. And in response to the point about the employment impact that this agreement might have, we also have concerns because it's not clear to us what this 1% of increased GDP will result in, whether the quality of the jobs are going to be better or worse, and in fact whether it will result just in displacement of these jobs. And I'll stop here and answer some questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And now it's Liz Cunha, the political campaigner from Greenpeace in Europe Union.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me here. There are, as you know, many different studies that are out there, many estimates, many legal analysis that point in the same direction. This agreement will increase deforestation. It will put the Amazon rainforest under more pressure. It will increase greenhouse gas emissions. And it will increase the use of pesticides as well as the amount of toxic chemicals that land on our plates here in Europe. I could talk about all the evidence that has been collected over the last few years, but you should know them already. Civil society has been sending you those studies for many months and years now. There is a coalition of more than 450 organizations of civil society from Europe and South America who oppose this trade agreement. There are multiple experts and organizations who are extremely concerned, even if they're not all invited to this room. They've been warning you about the negative consequences of this agreement for a long time now. I'm talking human rights groups, environmental organizations, local municipalities, consumer groups, farmers, of course, trade unions right here beside me, not to mention more than 2 million EU citizens who have signed petitions asking EU policymakers like yourselves to reject this agreement. You have this information already, though, so I want to focus in these minutes on the impact on humans, so the human impact of this agreement. I want to quote an indigenous leader from the Munduruku indigenous land in the Amazon rainforest, Alessandra Munduruku. She has a message to you, MEPs. And I quote her now: "If you vote in favor, you'll be voting for more and more death of our indigenous peoples." I want to repeat this one more time, because it's very important. If you vote in favor, you will be voting for more and more death of our indigenous peoples. That is a quote from Alessandra Munduruku, indigenous leader in the Amazon rainforest. I think it's important for you to hear this, and you're going to think that this is an exaggeration. I understand that you're used to talking about this agreement in terms of numbers and money, as was said before, and geopolitics. But the reality is that this is a matter of life or death for a lot of people in Brazil, but also in Argentina, also in Paraguay. Because the agricultural expansion in South America that is the basis of this agreement, it is killing people, people who are fighting to defend their territories and their rights. And I want you to imagine what will happen the day that you vote on this agreement. If you vote in favor, after the vote, you're going to put out a press release, maybe you're going to make a social media post or two, maybe you're going to get an email from a lobbyist from Business Europe thanking you for your vote, but then your life will move on. Your life will be just the same. There will be no lines and lines of constituents grateful to you for it. But their lives, the lives of indigenous peoples and local communities, they will be changed. Their future will be forever impacted by your vote. Because if you vote in favor, you are voting to help the predatory agribusiness in Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay to expand. You will directly help them to grow even bigger and even more politically powerful as well. And you might be wondering for the next years and even decades, every time you hear in the news that an indigenous person was assassinated by agribusiness in Brazil, or that even more of the Amazon has been destroyed, or that more rivers and children have been poisoned by pesticides, that animals have burned alive in forest fires, you're going to wonder, hey, could this have been prevented? And maybe it could have, by you as well, because if you vote in favor of this agreement, you will be partly responsible. I want to make this very clear. If you vote in favor, you will support the agribusiness that is carrying out the destruction. You'll be making them richer. You'll be helping them to sell more to Europe, helping them to expand, to invade lands, to burn. You will be complicit. If you vote in favor, you're voting to create more obstacles against the protection of the Amazon and the people who live there. You're voting to hurt indigenous peoples and hinder their fight for their rights. So the few seconds you spend pressing a button in favor, it will be short for you, but it will have consequences. It will impact many people who you'll never meet, but whose lives will be put in more danger by your decision. And I know your first reaction is to think that I'm exaggerating and being really dramatic, but this is the reality outside of these rooms here in the Parliament, in the front lines of the agricultural expansion in South America. So I want you to think carefully about what legacy you want to leave behind as a member of the European Parliament, because this will be your legacy. Every vote will count. Will you choose to stand with the Amazon rainforest, with indigenous peoples, with their children's futures, with local communities, with the people who are asking you, urging you to vote no? I have a final message from the indigenous leader, Alessandra Munduruku, to you MEPs. She says, vote against this trade agreement. This would help us. This would enable us to stay alive. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now I invite first the shadow rapporteurs, and Francisco is the first.
Bom, eu quero começar por lamentar esta última intervenção, que é uma manifestação hipócrita de neocolonialismo.
This intervention is neocolonialistic hypocrisy. I know these communities. I've been there. I was there when I've seen them die. I know exactly what's going on. And using the voice of an indigenous leader from Brazil to be here and campaign, that is indecent. It is outrageous. None of that is true. This agreement does not mean protecting the Amazon rainforest. It will increase the protection of the Amazon rainforest. Without this agreement, how will these countries solve this issue? What I've heard this afternoon is something very simple. There are extremists in the European Parliament, and sectors and some businesses want to implement an agreement that is beneficial for the EU and for Mercosur. As I said last week, I spoke to several MEPs from different parties, but also to people from Mercosur, and they're all in favour of this agreement because for them this agreement is a good thing. It will contribute to the development of these countries. And for us, it's the same thing. Of course, none of us think that a trade agreement will have an equal impact. Some sectors will suffer, and if that is the case, we need to find solutions for that within the EU, and we must show solidarity with affected sectors. But we cannot accept this type of discourse. This is intolerable. It's founded on lies. It's based on populism, emotions, fake news. I have been there. I have met many indigenous peoples in Brazil, in the Mercosur do Sul. I've been there. I have seen no indigenous person that is concerned. On the contrary, they believe that better relations will protect them. That is the truth.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a way too rational person for this fear-mongering that was presented here. I would really like to thank our first speaker for this very pragmatic approach of discussing and presenting facts. Maybe she has the opportunity to share a bit more her takeaway on the geopolitical implications of this agreement. And then, if that's possible, for our second and third speaker here in the room, I was wondering a bit what your alternative scenario would be, how the EU should have any say regarding labor rights or indigenous rights or cooperation if this is not for the agreement, because those countries are individual countries with their own rights, with their own systems, and as they do not have a say on what we're doing here, we do not have a say on that, but this trade agreement would give us the opportunity. So what would your alternative be to the scenarios that you described? Because trade is happening with or without an agreement, but with this agreement it will certainly happening under better conditions. So maybe you have alternative to the fearful scenarios that you presented us with. Thank you very much.
Saskia.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. I'm quite surprised, colleagues, because just last week I hosted here at the European Parliament the Chief Tau, so part of the Mercosur tribe, that has just said the opposite of what you said. So a T-shirt that says "Protect the Amazon," and who was asking us to not ratify this agreement. Where are the voices, of the indigenous peoples here in the European Parliament? Where are their voices in our in-camera hearings, so private meetings? We've not heard them once. And so that is what I am calling for, to be able to hear their voices, because you are faced with a problem, because you do not to hear voices against your ideas. You have a pro-free trade approach that you are, and some sectors that you are defending in your respective countries, and you are not willing to hear the negative effects that this agreement will have. You are not willing to hear the voices of farmers, but you are always willing to hear the voices of Copa, Copeja. They are in favour of trade. You may be shaking your heads, but Copa, Copeja is here, and you are listening to them. So I am interested to hear of this, by what was said by this academic. So when we talk about disinformation, this is exactly what this is. You should have mentioned the fact that you were a former foreign minister, President Sánchez, who is in favour of this agreement. So I think we should have some more nuance and accept that with this agreement comes some negative impacts as well, and we should hear these different impacts. I am very concerned to hear that last month in Brazil a decision was taken by the Senate which issued more licenses for mining in the Amazon, and I am very concerned to hear that last year Mr. Milei approved incentives for mass investment in oil and mining and gas and agribusiness. So do you think that is compatible with the sustainable development chapter of the agreement and the no scaling back on environmental commitments? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for their presentations, but especially Ms. Kuna from Greenpeace for unfortunately having to be the voice here for Indigenous communities, because they aren't represented and that phrase that, you know, nothing about us without us, because they are directly impacted. And I too have met with Indigenous communities and heard firsthand from them about asking that this bill or this trade deal not be passed because it will directly impact on them. It will mean that lives will be lost, that land will be taken from them. And it is unfortunate that they're not here to make that case themselves. I'd also like to echo the point that the representative from civil society, who I believe has said I am an academic, was also a Foreign Affairs Minister and is on the record as saying they are in favour of this trade agreement. So I think in the interest of transparency, it would have been really helpful for all of the room to be informed of that before they spoke. But I'd also like to put the wider context of this deal, because we know first and foremost was that Commissioner von der Leyen seized the opportunity of when France was in chaos, in a domestic chaos, to board a plane and to try and conclude this deal. And it comes in light at the time when we're seeing a massive rollback on environmental regulation within this commission. So that's important in the context as well, that it seems that mainly now it's the multinational corporations who are being taken account of, and nothing else, not the planet, not the communities, not the real civil society, not the farmers, and certainly not the voters in the country that I'm coming from, Ireland, because they do not want this deal. When it comes to questions, I would just say that I really want to raise the issue of public health, because DJ Sánchez says we need stronger import controls, and now we have the agreement with Mercosur, which explicitly reduces auditing and control measures of agricultural imports. The SPS chapter includes provisions that reduce checks, that speed up customs procedures. So how can the Commission square telling the public that the agreement reinforces health safety when in reality the checks will actually be reduced and will be weaker? So maybe the witnesses can comment on the public health risks of this deal, given that if the deal is ratified, products containing banned hormones, antibiotics and pesticides will enter the EU market. And we've had, I mean, MEPs have probably been approached. There are testimonies from veterinarians who've been out there and who will testify to say that the checks are not adequate, and we are going to be importing that food in, and it will be European citizens who will be eating that food.
Thanks a lot. And now it's Darius. He is not here. Jürgen.
Thank you, Chair. I do apologize for being a bit late. I had an engagement in another committee, and it is a bit unfortunate since this is a very important and dear issue to me. When I entered the room, I hear that we, the free traders, and I am one of them, I think free trade is very good. I think that increases the possibility to trade and to create prosperity. And of course, our free trade agreements that the Commission negotiates, and including this one, is taking care of a lot of sensitive issues, not least this agriculture issues that, of course, is important in this argument as well. But when I enter the room, I hear that we, the free traders, we are not interested in hearing the negative voices. And that's why I wanted to take the floor, because I think that is not a correct statement, to be honest. I have followed, I think, all of the monitoring groups on the Mercosur side, and the rapporteur has been very interested in having all the voices heard in that group. And even though I came late to this public hearing, I guess that we have had some negative and some positive voices on the podium as well. So, well, this is emotional. This is an important agreement for a lot of us. But let's stick to the facts and make sure that we base our agreements on the factual issues and not make up histories.
Thanks a lot, Barislav.
First of all, to me, this is a very balanced discussion, and I really appreciate the selection of panelists because I think that it offers us very balanced, very balanced picture on what is related to or what issues are related to the EU-Mercosur trade agreement. I would well, when we had the first meeting of Fair Trade Intergroup, which is led by Bernd Lange, Bernd, by offering us coffee, joked that after a few years of asking parliamentarian service to apply fair trade principles on procuring of coffee, he didn't succeed with this requirement. And so for me, and I believe that also for us, I think that it's absolutely fair not to trust that this trade agreement automatically will contribute to improvement of living and working conditions of people in Mercosur countries. Because if so, why it is so big problem to incorporate fair trade principles to our public procurement, at least in this house. So I think that this discussion is absolutely fair, that it is absolutely fair to ask the question. And I want to finally underline that we need to take into consideration relations of our trade policy with other policies. For example, public procurement policy. We now are in the period of assessment of public procurement rules. The Commission will propose some revision of public procurement rules. So let's to incorporate fair social and environmental standards to the public procurement rules. Let's make them obligatory for public procurers, and then also such a trade agreements can contribute. But if we have a problem to incorporate absolutely visible and transparent fair trade principles to our public procurement rules, I think that the question if really this EU-Mercosur trade agreement will contribute to improvement of working and living condition of people there is absolutely fair. Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Duda.
Domnule președinte, mulțumesc. Chiar dacă am...
Thank you very much, Chair. Even if I was late, I listened to every word said here. I had to vote in the Envy Committee. This is a debate that for us in the Agri Committee is very interesting. Each weekend when we go back home, we are talking to our farmers in each member state, and we collect their concerns, their worries, to see what path to follow in order to ensure for them the possibility to go on with their work, and even more important, to guarantee food safety in the EU. We are not absurd in the Agri Committee to say that we don't want trade agreements. They have their role. We cannot exist without trade agreements. This should be very clear, but it is important. We shouldn't make the farmers be negatively impacted, and also the consumers, because, dear colleagues, at present, what is being discussed from the point of view of this agreement is the fact that the country is part of Mercosur at present can use 84 chemicals that are banned in the EU because these substances are harmful to the human health on the one hand. On the other hand, these countries can't use growth hormones in the first phase of growth of the livestock that can no longer be detected at the slaughtering. So we should ask ourselves, do we have fair conditions for our farmers within the EU? Of course, I can appreciate the fact that from the European Commission they bring 1 billion euros to give to the farmers. And I've said in this committee that we are not in Judas' biblical story to be sold for 30 silver coins. We need predictable elements. If we sign this agreement, we need a firm guarantee that no agricultural product will come into the EU that does not observe the same quality standards. Let me see what are the checks made in the Mercosur states on the traceability of each antibiotic used in their farms to protect our citizens. At the same time, the future legislation or the current legislation should be adapted so that our farmers should have the same production conditions in the agriculture to have a fair competition. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Benoît.
Oui, merci, Président. Juste une réflexion.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to share a thought with you. It's an interesting discussion, and I think we need some moderation here. What is very important is that we need to use intellectual honesty. And when we talk about deforestation, and I hear some say that this agreement is in favour of avoiding deforestation when we are annually importing goods which correspond to the production of 1 million hectares of land, and there's no traceability as to where the product originates in South America. But I'm sorry, then you're making fun of us, and you need to have intellectual honesty. Now, the Paris Agreement apparently is a guarantee, but there's no figures given. None of it is binding. And, that's kind of slipped into the text too. And, you need to call a spade and stop making fun of us. And I don't understand why you're not providing us with more information, which is what Celine asked for in relation to the procedure, the timing, and so on. We have the impression that for the past year that we've been discussing it, it's entirely vague and sort of we're being led up the garden path, and that's simply not acceptable. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Francisco.
Muito obrigado de novo, Sr. Presidente. Para lembrar só duas coisas. Primeiro.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Just two comments. A couple of years ago, I wrote an own initiative report in relation to indigenous peoples. So I'm well versed with the difficulties they face. But I won't be handing out any lessons, nor do I want anyone to teach me any lesson on this. But I can't accept that the words of indigenous peoples are instrumentalized. And I myself have met with many representatives of indigenous peoples, and I know that they have legitimate interests and concerns. What I also know is that as part of an agreement with the EU, those concerns will be adequately taken into account. And as I said, we're not here to hand out lessons to anyone else, any other countries, be it the Argentinians, the Brazilians, but it's really not acceptable to put it in these terms, and talking about neo-colonialism. I mean, look at Uruguay and other countries too. A lot of these arguments are simply false and are in fact counterfacts.
6 minutes maximum each to the three panelists. And Arancha, you are the first. Excuse me, wait a minute. I forgot Darius.
Thank you. Just for 1 minute. I have a very crucial question. We heard today that food imported to Europe must meet the same strict standard as food produced in the European Union. So my question is how exactly to do it. It's estimated that around 3 to 5% only of shipments are subject to custom control. Most goods are not checked in detail, of course. So maybe somebody tell how to do it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now, Arancha.
Thank you very much. And let me misspell any misunderstanding that there may be about my own intervention here, which it is with my current function as Dean of the School of International Affairs in Sciences Po. Yes, of course, I have a past life. We all have past lives. In my past life, I've done many things. I've been foreign minister of a government of a member state, which I do not represent. Yes, I have had an agency of the United Nations that helps millions of SMEs in least developed countries grow and eradicate poverty through trade, International Trade Center, but I'm not representing here the International Trade Center. I'm here to represent the academia, Sciences Po. So I speak as such, but I have not hidden any of my previous affiliations. Second point I wanted to clarify on the question concerning the geopolitical implications of this agreement. I think what I can see is a very brutalization of international relations, brutalization of international trade, weaponization of international trade, and in this context, two regions that do not want international trade to be subject to these unilateral pressures, but rather want to make sure that trade between them is subject to rules of the game, and that they want rules, and they also want alternatives, because they can see that some of the countries with whom they trade are not exactly opening markets, but closing the markets to them. So what I think both the EU and the Mercosur countries have in common is that they want trade with rules. They want trade with rules on safety, on security, on labor rights, on women's empowerment, on protection of indigenous people. This is what I read in the agreement. Now, we may believe or not believe what's in the text that is ahead of us. I've read it, and this is what I see. I see in this text that the Paris Agreement is an quote-unquote essential element in the deal, meaning that you can partially or totally suspend this agreement if another party leaves the Paris Climate Agreement or does not act in good faith towards this agreement. This is what it says. So now you can believe or not what you read. I'm just describing what I read. Final point I would make, Mr. Chairman. No trade agreement automatically contributes to good growth. Nowhere, in any country in this planet. You need more than a good trade agreement. You need good social safety nets. You need good domestic policies. You need investments in infrastructure. You need access to credit. The story is a good trade agreement being woven with good domestic policies. That's how you can achieve good results. Thank you again for this opportunity, and happy to contribute in any way, shape or form it's desirable.
Thanks a lot, Arancha. Elena.
So, to the free traders, trade unions are not against trade. I said it at the outset, but perhaps you were not in the room. Even the founding articles of a now defunct organization like the WTO say that market opening is not an end per se. Trade ought to be facilitated to eliminate poverty. So we're all for trade agreements, but we also need to make sure that the rules level the playing field and that there's improved situations along the way as opposed to the reverse. And I think it's a clear objective of the European Union, by the way, not something that the trade unions have written, but something that the European Commission has adopted at its own policy to pursue also other objectives aside from opening markets. And what would the alternative be? The alternative would be a text that says that the labor clauses are not only binding, but enforceable. And when there are violations of the labor clauses, i.e. of ILO conventions, sanctions can be deployed. And this is currently not the case with this agreement. There are talks about reviewing the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter once the agreement is ratified. But then what guarantees do we have that that review will actually take place? This was said with the agreement with Canada in 2016. We're in the year 2025, and we're still waiting for that review of the trade and sustainable development chapter. The other proposal we understand is being considered is a time-bound roadmap, like the one that has been proposed to the government of Vietnam. To date, Vietnam has still failed to ratify Convention 87 on freedom of association. So we, the trade unions, think that these options that are being thought of are still somewhat short of our expectation, and given the experience that we have, will not deliver on the critical demand, which is that the agreement also has to guarantee that there are no violations of labor rights. To the extent that is possible, trade agreements cannot make miracles, but at least the basics conditions ought to be there for these issues to be addressed. And since the government of Milei has been mentioned, that is a clear regression. I mean, there's been a reduction and a limitation on the right to strike by government decree. That is not something that we expect of trade partners that want to be treated as equal. The basic rules of engagements are the conventions of the ILO. The right to strike and the fundamental rights of trade unions must be respected. No ifs, no buts. And that all, as I said at the beginning, that also applies to all the 27 member states on this side of the bargain. So it's not an expectation that we levy just on trade partners. And as I said at the beginning, this is a shared view with the trade unions from the Mercosur country. So I will not accept also veiled accusations of a neo-colonial attitude, because that is not the stance of trade unions. We have one interest, and that is to protect working people, their working conditions, guarantee that they are working in safe environments with safe chemical products, etc., etc. This is no surprise. This is again, it's I think you have invited the ETUC many times before at your hearings, and you will hear us time and time again until these objectives are actually achieved. Everywhere in the world, and this is not idealistic, we have the tools to impress change also by utilizing trade agreements. Is not, as the professor mentioned, is not the only tool. You also need national policies. You also need effective labor inspectorates. Now, is that the case? Are labor inspectorates in our partner countries sufficiently resourced and staffed and effective? Is there any support that they need, like the ILO technical assistance to make these steps? Is there anything that we on our side could improve on that front? Certainly. But at the moment, the clauses in this agreement do not incentivize enough these aspects. That's our position. Thank you.
Thanks. And Liz.
Thank you. I want to say something first to MEP Assis, because the indigenous leader who I quoted, she was here in Brussels last month and she asked to meet with you, and you rejected her meeting request. You said you were too busy. Otherwise, you would have heard it directly from her mouth. Okay, so the accusation of fake news, I'm sorry. If you had made time, you would have heard from her. The articulation of indigenous peoples of Brazil was here. It was meeting MEPs to ask them to vote against the agreement. I want to say something on the Paris Agreement as a central element, since it was brought up by multiple people. The language itself is very vague. The EU and Mercosur commit only to remaining a party to the Paris Agreement in good faith, as was mentioned by the academic as well. And according to other academics, this is a super weak formulation. Okay, Professor Christina Eckes from the University of Amsterdam, she wrote very clearly that the clause is vague and adds little meaning and little teeth to already existing international obligations. And there are many other legal analyses out there that conclude that the EU-Mercosur agreement would even violate the EU's obligations under international climate laws, because the deal is expected to lead to an increase of greenhouse gas emissions, not the reduction. So anyone who is claiming that the Paris Agreement as an essential element is suddenly making this agreement a game changer for climate protection and reducing greenhouse gas emissions is just not true. And you're not fooling anyone. Okay? It is totally incoherent for anyone who really cares about climate action to vote in favor of this trade deal. I also want to mention one thing that I'm surprised didn't come up was the fact that this new text that was published in December, of course, we're waiting for the final legally scrubbed version, it introduces a new rebalancing mechanism that will allow Mercosur countries to launch complaints against measures by the EU or by member states. So third countries will have a new mechanism to challenge EU or member state measures that impact their exports to the EU. So they can claim adjustments or compensation. And for example, this could be used against any new measures that try to apply European production standards to imports from Mercosur. And according to legal experts, this mechanism is not in line with current European legal practice, and it's a dangerous precedent. I'm surprised that not more of you have been looking into this. Just to wrap up, I just want to get back to what is at stake here with this agreement, because it was mentioned before, even the Commission's own assessment predicts that the deal will only lead to an increase of 0.1% of GDP in 10 years. Okay, so compared to that, you're really taking a lot of risks here. A lot of risks to the lives of indigenous peoples, to consumers in Europe, to animal welfare, to the climate, okay, our shared future on this earth. You can still force the Commission to get back to the drawing table, and I would urge you to make use of that power and say no to this agreement. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Now I invite the ambassador to have a feedback for this discussion, and then Leopoldo will have about 20 minutes to answer all the open questions. Ambassador, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would need a lot of time to respond in detail to everything that I have heard here today, but that's not the case. So there are maybe two things that I would like to stress here. The first one is a point that I made in my initial speech, and I will distribute it to those MEPs that did not arrive in time for my presentation, which is we have trade, and MEP Francisco says, stressed this, we have trade with the EU right now. So many of the points that were made here, unless the MEPs are suggesting we completely stop trade between the EU and Mercosur, we are in deep trouble. Because basically they're saying we don't respect anything and that everything that we're doing is illegal and wrong. So I'm having trouble digesting that. So the agreement will not change the current reality. We are exporting to you. That's one point. The other point that is important to put into context is the trade flows from Mercosur to the EU. You're not our only trading partner. We trade elsewhere. So I recommend, since the colleague from the NGO is suggesting that you look up at the details, please look at the percentages. And you will discover that, yes, this agreement is important. Yes, it can make a difference, a positive one, I think. But it won't change our trade flows. In the case of Brazil, for example, we're a global trader. We trade everywhere with everybody. Okay? My last point, respecting the timing of your meeting, apart from thanking everybody that spoke here today, is to say that my colleagues of Mercosur and I, we are at your disposal to answer any questions, respond to any queries, and try to elucidate a bit things. Because, for example, I heard here today comments about pesticides, about hormones. We don't export any meat with hormones to the EU. And next year in September, you have a regulation completely forbidding that, growth hormones. So if we don't comply, we don't export. It's as simple as that. You have some of the most stringent rules in the world that we comply with to export here. So I leave this meeting. I'm very grateful that you invited me and you gave me the floor, but I think that we have a lot of explaining and conversation to do. Thank you.
Indeed. So, Leopoldo.
Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank very much all the speakers and all the honorable members for the various points that have been made. It clearly shows that the political debate that will start formally soon is going to be a very important one for the European Union. That you in the European Parliament, the representatives of the member states in the Council, will have a very big political responsibility in deciding whether or not we will be able to sign and then implement, give life to this agreement. I will try to go through some of the points, maybe react and do my best to answer some of the questions. I think the first thing that strikes me is the question about who is going to benefit from this agreement. And there I would like to recall a number of figures. First of all, the European Union GDP depends on something like 20% on external trade. Trade is one of the biggest elements that define the wealth that the European Union member states are able to produce every year. And this percentage is actually much higher than in a certain number of other trading partners. Yeah? The second point is that we have in the EU more than 30 million workers, I think it's 34 million workers, that depend directly on external trade. And the studies and the analysis that we have made show that generally the workers that work in sectors which are directly exposed to external trade actually tend to have better jobs and better paid jobs. Finally, it is not true that international trade is the appanage of big multinationals. When I was dealing with investment policy a long time ago, I remember that there were studies from the UNCTAD, so not the Commission, not the World Bank, the UNCTAD, that were indicating that by far the vast majority of companies that trade are small and medium-sized enterprises. This, as a matter of fact, is the best indication of why it is so important to trade on the basis of rules. Because when you are an SME and you decide to venture in an external market without knowing the language, without knowing the rules, without knowing the practices, you must be able to rely on the rules. And this is why I was saying at the beginning that one of the important elements of this agreement is that it's going to be an agreement between two trading blocs that still very much believe in rules-based trade. So this is who the agreement is going to benefit to the workers, to the SMEs, to the possibility of creating more economic activity in the European Union. Of course, we know that the benefits of trade are never distributed evenly. We know that. We know that certain sectors are going to suffer more than others, that some sectors maybe will not even benefit from this agreement directly. But the general outcome of this agreement is that it will allow to create more economic activity, more jobs, and on the basis of common rules. The second thing that I wanted to say is that I've heard some of the members mentioning the question of opacity, allegedly, or the fact that there is only a selection of stakeholders that are heard. Now, I want to recall that in terms of opacity, and the colleagues have sent me the figures, in the 2019-2024 period, the Commission has appeared in 14 monitoring groups, 10 other committees other than INTA, and we had over 40 bilateral meetings with interested members of the Parliament. And we are still today always ready to continue the discussion with you. So if any of you wants to have a discussion on any of the elements of the agreement, you have our commitment that we will come to your offices and we will be able to continue the discussion. In terms of engaging with other stakeholders, the Commission has a practice, or DG Trade has a practice of holding civil society meetings, and we've had countless number of civil society meetings where we have heard not just the big companies, but also the NGOs, also the unions, also the other elements of the civil society that want to tell us things. And this openness continues to apply. Finally, we have always published the results of the negotiations. And I can say that DG Trade, the European Commission, is probably the most transparent trade organization in the world. So rather than talking about opacity and so on, can we please talk about the substance? I've had questions about timing and the architecture. And I can, first of all, clarify for Mr. Cassar the procedure. The Commission is a negotiator for the agreement on the basis of negotiating directives from the Council and whatever indications the European Parliament gives to it. It is a responsibility for the Commission to decide when it considers that it has concluded the negotiations on the basis of a sufficiently good deal. This is what happened in December of last year. Once the agreement is then concluded politically, there is a long process of, first of all, what we call the legal scrubbing. So we have to make sure that the text that has been negotiated actually makes sense from a legal point of view. And then, of course, we have to translate the agreement. All this takes time. And this is why we have concluded the political negotiations. We have concluded politically the negotiations in December, and we are in June, and we still have not been able to present the text to you, simply because these procedures take time. Now, I can confirm that the indication that I have is that the proposal for signature and conclusion will be adopted by the Commission before the end of this month. When this agreement is then proposed, of course, then the political debate starts. There is a political debate in the Council about whether the Council agrees to the signature of the agreement. Then there is a debate in the Parliament as to whether the Parliament is ready to give the consent to this agreement. To the question of Mr. Mariani, of course, the Commission will take into account when it makes its proposal, will take into account the negotiating directives that it has received from the Council, it will take into account the European treaties, it will take into account the opinions of the European Court of Justice, and so on and so forth. Now, will we present the agreement in a certain architecture or not? Can I please ask for another bit of patience, because this is a prerogative for the College of Commissioners to decide, but this is a decision that is going to come very quickly. Now, there was another question, I think it was from Madame Imar, about the whole questions of standards and what kind of guarantees in writing there are in terms of standards. There was then questions about the reciprocity of standards and so on. And I must say, without this being polemic, I can't help recalling something you, Chairman, that you have been saying in relation to the current issue that we have with the United States of America. Every time we've come to the INTA committee, we have been asked to have a confirmation from the Commission that we would not agree to negotiate on our standards. Whereas here for Mercosur, we're asked exactly the contrary, that we impose on our partner countries a certain number of standards. So what is the notion of sovereignty? Is it just our sovereignty that we are expected to impose on everybody else? Or is it a question of accepting that my sovereignty stops where the sovereignty of my trading partner starts? And of course, what is important, however, is that my sovereignty is not put into question. And this is exactly what we have done in this agreement, and as we have done in all trade agreements. We have not reduced in 1 inch the level of protection for health, for safety, and so on, that we have as a matter of European legislation. So you cannot look at the agreement and then take conclusions without also looking at what kind of European legislation applies. So the best guarantee in writing that I can give you, Madame Imar, is what the European legislation says. And I defy anyone to indicate what in the Mercosur agreement, or for that matter in any other agreements that the EU has concluded with trading partners, where does it say that we lower the levels of standard? We had a monitoring group not long ago that we discussed a certain number of SPS questions. And of course, the debates in monitoring groups are confidential, but I would like to recall that my colleague from DG Santé indicated that, for example, currently 100% of poultry imports from Brazil are subject to physical checks at EU borders, whereas the normal standard frequencies for all countries are 30%. So how does it work for the imports of products that are subject to standards in the European Union? For example, if you take the question of the exports of beef, only certain establishments in Brazil, in Argentina, that have been listed, which are listed in European legislation, are authorized to export to the European Union. Not only that, but of course there is a system of checks, but also these countries have to accept that there are auditors from the European Commission that go there, verify individual establishments and decide whether the establishments continue to have the possibility to export to the European Union. So the system is extremely tight. There is no importation of hormone-traded beef. There was a question about estradiol, which is something that is used in cows. As soon as it was found, and by the way, this was found with the help of the Brazilian authorities, that there was a case that we would have an issue, immediately the imports of these animals have been stopped, and there has been no import of estradiol-treated beef. There is, however, a question indeed, is that in the European Union, you and the Council, on proposals from the Commission, have legiferated very much in terms of the Green Deal, in terms of standards, and so on and so forth. So at a certain moment, there is a question of, is this really fair? Now, for a long time, the position of the Commission has been that we have to be extremely careful in these matters. Now, there are things that we consider are global goods, and so therefore we want to impose a certain number of standards to third countries. The best example, again, is the protection of the Amazon forest that explains why we have decided to adopt the EU deforestation regulation. That says we are not going to import products that are not sufficiently certified, that they don't come from areas of illegal deforestation. There are other examples. For example, there is legislation in Europe that protects pollinators, bees, and this applies to everybody. In terms of the protection of health, of course, when there are imports that come from countries where, for example, a certain number of pesticides are used, there are maximum residue limits that have been calculated by the European Food Safety Agency as not being harmful to the human population that are allowed. But in the vision for agriculture, the Commission goes much further. For the first time, it says that for the questions, for example, on animal welfare or also in relation to the use of certain pesticides, it will start impact assessments to see whether indeed it is necessary to consider a certain number of measures that should also be applied to imports. So this is not something that we do in trade agreements, but it is something that we are allowed to do as a matter of our own legislation. Finally, the question of level playing field. As the ambassador was saying, we already trade a lot with Brazil, with Argentina, and so on. So we basically accept the question that there are products that come that do not have exactly the same quality methods or production methods in the EU. But fundamentally, the best way to make sure that we have a level playing field is actually not to look at how products are produced, but how much of these products are going to come into the EU. And this is why in the agreement we have negotiated very carefully a certain number of tight TRQs for the most sensitive products. Because this, in our opinion, is the best way to make sure that we are not going to be faced with a flood of imports that would cause indeed difficulties for example, of farmers. We have combined this with a safeguard, which the first time in our agreements also applies to products under TRQs. And we have indeed announced, and this will be part of the MFF discussions, the possibility of having a fund, which rather than being a fund because we know that things are going to be bad, we have proposed a fund because we know that it is important in case there is a problem that we can intervene, because somebody said we also have to have accompanying measures, and this is exactly what we are doing. We are thinking about accompanying measures. the whole question of, first of all, I must take issue with the colleague from the unions who said that the WTO has died. It has not died yet. It is in trouble, but it needs reform, but it has not died. So let's not exaggerate this. The question of the Paris Agreement. The whole question of sustainability in trade agreements is very simple. These agreements are very powerful. And so in continuous discussions politically, including with this parliament, we have come to the conclusion that, where possible, we should use these agreements to also support other policies that look at sustainability. This is why we say that the Paris Agreement is an essential element of the agreement with Mercosur, because we want to be able to offer the power of the Mercosur Agreement to also support the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And politically, of course, it also means that our Mercosur partners agree with us that the Paris Agreement is a super important agreement. Of course, it's not a game changer. Of course, the agreement with Mercosur will not automatically result in the full respect of the Paris Agreement. But it will allow us to take action if we think that the Paris Agreement is not going to be properly implemented. We can discuss at length about whether the notion of good faith, not good faith, and so on. Good faith is a principle of international law that was already used at the Roman times. So, at a certain moment, we have to be clear that we can give all kinds of interpretations, but when a panel, so professional lawyers, will have to look at whether the conditions are met or not, of course they will refer to all the things that exist. The questions of the support to the ILO conventions is exactly the same thing. We have decided to offer the agreement with Mercosur and with other agreements in support for the implementation of the ILO agreements. Now, if the provisions are not sufficient, and we decide, and you decide that the agreement with Mercosur should not be ratified, then what? Are we going to be better off with the implementation and the ratification of the ILO conventions? Of course not. The experience that we have so far, because at the end of the day, this whole policy on sustainability is a bit new, the experience that we have and what we want to do is not an automatic system where you don't respect the ILO convention, I sanction you. No. Is to be able, first of all, to know when there are questions. And this is what the text of the sustainability chapter says, because we create domestic advisory groups, we create the possibility to bring complaints and so on. But two is the possibility to cooperate together. So, okay, there is a problem with labor inspectorates. Let's have a discussion about labor inspectorates. This is something that we can do in the agreement. It is not something that we can do in the absence of an agreement. Final question about the non-violation provision. The long answer to this is one, the text does not oblige us to change the legislation. It's written black and white in the text. Two, it is a bilateral provision, so it's not that Mercosur is allowed to sue us if we do Green Deal legislation, but we also can go to Mercosur and say that we're unhappy about a certain number of things. It is based on the fundamental principle of legitimate expectations. It has a very high threshold for being used. And in any event, in case there is no solution that is found in consultations with the other party, the effects would be that there would be compensatory measures, but they would also have to maintain an element of preference. The short answer is that the non-violation complaint mechanism exists in the GATT since 1947. So since 1947, those member states that were contracting parties to the GATT and those member states that have subsequently become contracting parties to the GATT and members of the WTO have been able to do the entire European Union without problems from that point of view. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Saskia, you have a short remark or something?
We can have an endless ping pong, but that's also what it is about. And we haven't touched upon the rebalancing mechanism at all. When you mention Mr. Commissioner answer on pesticides and animal welfare, I fully agree with this line. But if we do so, will our friends from the Mercosur agree with that? And if they disagree with that, they can activate the rebalancing mechanism to contest the rules that we want to put in place in the EU. Are you going to split the agreement? If so, the Paris Agreement as essential element will be in the political part. And what is the meaning of it under the trade relations we have with the partner countries if it's not in the trade part of the deal? I have many other questions, but okay. You see, we have no concrete answers to this, and actually it will be seen in the future if we were right or wrong, but I think there are many issues at stake that are not solved today. And again, you were talking about transparency. When we were talking about transparency, it's about hearing all the voices and not being accused of neocolonialism when we also carry the voices from the people in the Mercosur countries that are not being heard either at the European side. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
No, thank you, Ms. Bribon. Can I say that I take a little bit of issue when you say that this is a ping pong? I mean, we are listening very carefully, and we try to explain. Now, you can disagree with us. No, but yes, but we listen very carefully, and we do our best to bring about answers. On the question of the architecture, I have answered the question. I would please ask for a little bit of patience, because this is a decision that the Commission will take. You will see it very quickly. On the non-violation mechanism, because it's not a rebalancing mechanism, on the non-violation mechanism, I've explained the view that we have. And so I think that I've answered those questions. If you think that I haven't, we're very happy to continue the conversation.
And indeed, we will do it. We will have further exchange of views, specifically when now the text is going into the ratification process, and then we will have a lot of discussion in the Parliament. By the way, it is also not the first discussion we had here in a hearing. Some years ago, we had a hearing. We have our monitoring groups and a lot of bilateral issues. And we will go to Brazil in the end of July, so that we have direct contact with a lot of organizations and stakeholders, and of course the indigenous people as well. So we are looking to hear all the arguments, and based on that we will then formulate our assessment of the agreement. And of course we are quite self-confident that we are looking what is necessary, what is in, are there additions, and we are really we have the power to also make some additional requirements in the process. But at the end of the day, I'm really convinced that we should really have a good sailing into this historic partnership between European Union and the Mercosur country, specifically in these challenging global times. Thanks a lot to everybody here on the podium. Thanks a lot, Leopoldo, and thanks, of course, to the colleagues as well. Thank you.